Hello, everyone, and welcome to our pointless review of Stone Age. And by pointless, we of course mean that we're not rating it. We're not rating it out of 10, we're not giving it a score, we're not doing anything like that because ultimately that's just going to be my opinion and maybe the opinion of people around me. So, our pointless review is going to look at the game, look at where it's come from, look at how it plays, look at the mechanics, and to help you see if it's perhaps a game you want to try or you want to see more of before deciding to take the plunge on buying it. So let's get started with Stone Age. So Stone Age came out in 2008. So depending on the edition you have, you might have two different names for the designer. It could be Michael Tummelhofer or Bernd Brunhofer. They are in fact the same person. Michael Tummelhofer is Bernd Brunhofer's pseudonym, so it is in fact the same person. It is for 2 to 4 players. It plays in 60 to 90 minutes, which, from my experience, is a fairly accurate playing time. I always say to people if it's a game that you are learning, maybe err on the side that it's going to be on the longer estimate, maybe even over the estimate. But once you know how to play and once you've played it once or twice, I would say Stone Age is 60 to 90 minutes. The learning curve on this I have found to be quite shallow. It's not a particularly complicated game to get into. It's quite light, it's quite quick, it's quite intuitive, I've found. And the age range is for 13 plus. So, what is Stone Age? So, Stone Age is a game that is set, believe it or not, in the Stone Age of mankind. Stone Age is a worker placement point collecting game. There is an element of set collecting in the form of building tiles and civilization cards, which we'll talk about. And the game has its own built-in end timer. So when there aren't enough civilization cards to fill 4 spaces, which again I'll talk about, that's the game end, or when one pile of building tiles is empty is also another trigger. And again, I'll talk about those in a second. And the winner of the game is basically the person with the most points. So let's talk about how you get points. So the final scoring of the points is based on something called your civilization cards. Each of these adjusts your score in different ways. So there are some civilization cards that have a green background, and these are a set. And these cover things like art, pottery, writing, essentially things that your civilization will have discovered, hopefully, by the end of the Stone Age. The more of these green cards you have, the more points you have. So if you have 1, you get 1 point. If you have 2, you get 4 points. If you have 3, you get 9 points. Basically, you square the number of those cards that you have. But you can't have duplicates. Any duplicates would just be a new set. So if you had 2 writing cards, that wouldn't be 4 points. That would just be 2 points. But then you have cards with a yellow or sand background, and these affect the score that you have based on other aspects of the game. So some of them have got huts, so you would multiply the number of buildings you have. Some of them have got your agricultural level, which is how much you've put into your agriculture and farming. Some have meeple multiplier. So your meeple is the little people, the little workers that you'll be putting out in the game, and these cards multiply how many meeple you have because that will increase during the game. And there are some which have a tool tile, which is based on your tool level because you will be developing tools during the game. All of this is added into your score. You will also gain points during the game for collecting certain civilization cards. or for building huts. So I've talked a lot there about the different pieces of the game. Um, so let's take a look at the board, which I think is gorgeous. I love the board. It's not like this amazing big dynamic artwork or anything, but it is a gorgeous board. It's clear, it's concise, it's self-explanatory with what things are once you know what goes where. It's just a joy to see on the table. So you place the board, and then you sort out your food tokens and stack them all in the hunting grounds. So food tokens are really important. You won't score points for having loads of food, but if you don't have food at the end of a round, your people are going to starve. Not good. Then you've got your other resources. There is a wood resource, clay resource, stone resources, and gold resources. Then you've got your actual tribe in the center where you have your tool tiles. Then across the bottom, you've got your building tile stacks and your civilization cards. And down the left, you've got your agriculture level. And around the whole thing, like so many Euro style worker placement games, you've got your scoring track. Each player also has their own board where your own personal tribe is. This is where you will keep your buildings that you've built, the tools that you've developed, your meeples when they're not out on the board, the food, and there's also a little handy guide to your civilization cards and their final scoring. So, how the game plays, essentially, what you want is to gather the resources that you need in order to build buildings and collect civilization cards. The buildings and civilization cards need various combinations of wood, clay, stone, and gold. And it's all shown on the card what they need. The civilization cards might give you a set, or they might multiply what you already are developing, as we already said. And the building tiles give you raw points each time you build them. And the civilization cards and building tiles also both act as a timer to the game. Across the board, you'll see there are spaces denoted by little circles. This is how many workers you can have in those spaces. So how the round works is that one after another, each player will place their meeple on the game board. So you can place one, some, or all of them as you like, but you can only place them in one location on your go. So, for example, I could place one in the forest to get wood later in the round, or I could place two at the clay pits to get clay later in the round, or I could place all of them at the river to pan for gold later in the round. It's completely up to me, but once I've placed something, it's then the next player's turn to do the same thing. And we continue round until all the meeples that everyone have been placed somewhere. Now, depending on the number of players, there are some limits to how many different players can go to a location. In a two-player game, you can't actually share a location. And the places that you can go include the hunting ground. So the hunting ground is slightly special in that it can have any number of players there. It's noted by a big circle, and there's no limit to the number of meeples that you can put there. Hunting ground is how you mainly get food, although some civilization cards do give you food as well. Then there's the forest where you can get wood, which is the easiest of the main resources to get. Then there is the clay pits where you can get clay. Then the stone quarry where you can get stone. And then the river where you can get gold. To get the civilization cards, you do have to place a meeple on the card, and there is a circle on the cards when they're out on the board where you can place those meeples. And to build a specific hut that's available, you'll place your meeple there as well. There is also places in the village where you can put your meeple. So you can put them in the fields, which will increase your agriculture later in the round. And agriculture is one of those things which can increase your score if you've got a civilization card that multiplies your agriculture. You can place 2 meeples so that later in the round you get a third meeple from that. So that's to increase your population. You can also place them at the tool hut in order to gain tool tiles. So tool tiles allow you to modify die rolls, which we'll come to in a moment. There's lots of different ways in the board game world to place workers. Some have it where you place them one at a time as you go around the players. Some have it a bit like Stone Age, where you can place 1 or 2 or as many as you like, just in one place. Some games have it where once you place a meeple, you gain that benefit of the location immediately. And some, like Stone Age, do it later. So you never gain anything immediately from placing a meeple in Stone Age. And there is some tactical and strategic thinking around where and how you place your meeples. So apart from hunting, everywhere else is limited to how many meeples there can be. So if you see that someone needs loads of wood, you and other players can work together to block that player. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the game. That's the way the game works. But obviously, they can do the same to you on other rounds or with other things that you need. Things like civilization cards and building tiles, you can only ever have 1 meeple on each one of those cards or each one of those building tiles. So sometimes there's a race to be the first person to put it on a certain card or on a certain building before someone else gets a chance. And the order in which you place your meeples is determined by who the first player is. Now, in Stone Age, there is no way to gain the first player marker. So in some games, you can put a worker somewhere where you gain the first player marker and that makes you the first player. In Stone Age, it just rotates round after round across all the players. So that adds a little bit of thinking about timings, because you can't take first player, so you do have to think about, right, I'm not going to be first player for a couple of rounds, so I need to think about how I'm going to do this. Of course, the other things are that you need to bear in mind what civilization cards you already have. So civilization cards are played face down, so other players don't know immediately what you have. They may remember which ones you've bought over the game, but that's quite a difficult thing to do. You, as a player, can look at your civilization cards whenever you like, so you will know if you've got big multipliers in there for agriculture, you need to be going to the field more in order to maximize that. But other people might guess that's what you're doing if you're constantly going to the field. So it's not just strategic about where and how many you place at the resources. It's also about strategically using the village locations for the tools and the agriculture and the population as well. Because obviously, the other aspect to population outside of gaining points potentially at the end of the game is that you have more meeples giving you more options of where to go, but also increasing your chances of gaining resources, which is what we'll talk about now. So once everyone has placed their meeple, that's when players take their actions associated with their figures. And this is done in order with all those players' meeples. There's no advantage or disadvantage to going first or last with taking the actions of where your meeple are. It's just a mechanic of the game that helps keep it organized. I guess in theory you could do it simultaneously if you had some extra dice and weren't worried about keeping track of everything. I get if everyone's doing it simultaneously, it might be quite chaotic and a bit confusing. So I would always recommend doing it one at a time in turn order. just to keep it straightforward. Also, you might want to be paying attention to what people are collecting and how many and so on. How you gain the actions. So we'll talk about the village actions first. So the tool hut. It's very straightforward. You take your meeple from the tool hut and take a value 1 tool tile and place it on your board in one of your tool slots, of which you have 3. Once you have a tool value of 1 in each of those slots, the next time you take a tool hut action, you turn them over to a 2. Once you've got 3 2s, the next time you take an action, you swap the 2 for a 3. And once you've got all 3s, if you get all 3s, you can then take another tool action where you can flip them over to a 4. I'll talk about why tool value and the number of them is important in a moment when we come to the resources. At the main hut, you take your 2 figures from there and gain a 3rd meeple from your supply onto your player board in your little village. From now on, you've got an extra meeple to place. There are 10 meeple altogether for each player, and you start with 5, so you can do this action 5 times over the game. In the field, you again take your meeple back and increase your agriculture level by 1 on the track down the side. You do start agriculture level 0, so if you had an agriculture level of 0 at the end of the game with agriculture multiplication cards, you're going to score nothing for those, so that's why that's important. Let's take a look at the resource locations. So gaining resources is based on the number of meeples that you've placed there and what the resource is. When you take your resources, you take your meeple back, remembering how many you have, and that is the number of dice you roll. So essentially, each meeple rolls a die. Once you've rolled, using the very nice smelling provided cup, you then need to add up the roll and divide by a certain number depending on the resource. So for wood, you take your roll and divide it by 3. The result is the number of wood you have gained rounded down, always rounded down. So for example, if you had 2 meeples and you rolled 2 3s, you divide your total is 6 and you divide it by 3. This gives you 2, so you gain 2 wood. Instead, let's say that your 2 meeples rolled a 2 and a 3. That's a total of 5. You divide that by 3, that is 1 2/3, which you round down, so you would only get 1 wood for that roll. If you roll, let's say you roll 2 1s in the forest, it means you don't get anything. For the clay mount, it's exactly the same, except you're dividing the result by 4, so clay is slightly harder to get. In the quarry, you are dividing it by 5, so it's even harder. In the river for the gold, you're dividing it by 6, so that's the hardest. Hunting is done exactly the same way, except you're dividing it by 2, so you're fairly likely to get food unless you've only got 1 meeple there and you just happen to roll a 1. That's going to be a bad time for you. The way that the resource collection is done, I really like. I like that you have to think about the number of meeples that you're placing there, because you have to balance out the probabilities of gaining that resource with that many meeple compared to what else you want to do with your meeple. Now, the other thing that can help with die rolling is your tools. So you can modify the roll total by the value of the tool, and you'll turn your tool 45 degrees so it's diagonal to show that you've used it. But if you've got a tool value of 1, you can turn that and add 1 to your roll of a 3 and a 2 to make it 6. So you've essentially used a tool to gain an extra wood in that example. And this is a fantastic little mechanic because it means that you're mitigating the luck and the randomness of your die rolls as you develop. Thematically, you are developing tools which are helping you gain resources. Towards the end of the game, the die rolls essentially become less and less important, and it becomes more and more about how you are using the tools. If you have a tool value of 2, 3, or 4, you have to use the whole value on whichever single roll you've done. You can't split them, so you can't, say, roll in the forest, use your value 4 tool half, and then save the other 2 for when you're over at panning for gold. You can't do that, which is sensible. Otherwise, it's a little bit too overpowered, I think. But that's just a great little thematic thing. As you're developing these tools, the randomness and the luck is just goes out of the window. It gets less and less and less. Essentially, once you've got a few tools, food doesn't become an issue because you can guarantee, even if you only send one meeple to go hunting, if you've got at least a value 1 tool, you're always going to come back with at least 1 food. So it's fantastic. It's a great little, it's not earth-shattering mechanic, it's just a really nice little thing in the game. Of course, there are the civilization cards you can acquire, so these cost resources. So you'll be either using resources you've already collected in previous rounds, or you'll be gambling that you're gaining resources to buy these civilization cards. Now, each civilization card has a cost 1 to 4 printed on the board because as they come off, they move and get cheaper. So there's a bit of a push your luck element. How long do you wait? How cheap do you wait for this particular card that you want to go before someone else takes it? And obviously, which resource do you use? Because you can't use food, so the cheapest one you can use is wood. So you really want to be spending wood on that. But wood is also used for your buildings, and your building tiles need certain resources as well. And the building tiles are essentially how you convert your resources into points, and it's the points that you're after. So once all the players have taken their actions, it means that the board is cleared of meeples. That's when you have to feed your tribe. You have to have each meeple on your player board needs 1 food, so you always have to be making sure you've got enough food. You can spend resources if you don't have enough food. Otherwise, you're going to start losing points because you don't lose meeples, they don't starve to death, but you do lose points, which isn't fantastic in a points-driven game. Once that's done, if anyone's built huts, you'll be turning new huts over. If anyone's bought civilization cards, you'll be sliding them all across and refilling it. And the first player marker will go around and you'll start the next round all over again. And that's basically the game. It's such a straightforward and simple game. I always think Stone Age is a good beginner game if someone's just getting into board gaming, or if people out there are not sure if this is something for them, if you know, they've heard board gaming is a big thing. Stone Age is a really nice, easy game to get into. It's very thematic for a points-driven game, and it's really quick and simple to learn. The rule book is fantastic. It's got examples. It's clear. The quality of the pieces in the most recent editions is really good. The card stock is really nice. The meeples are really good. Game-wise, I'm a huge fan of worker placement games, so I'm always going to be happy about that. I think if you are looking for easy to get into games, Stone Age is a good one to think of. It has an illustrious past. It was a nominee at the Spiel des Jahres. It was second place at the Deutsche Spiel Prize. So it's a renowned game. It's easy to get hold of, relatively speaking. if you are into worker placement, this is definitely a game you want to try out. If you're into historical games, you're not. It is historical, but it's not as historical as other games. It's not. That's not its focus. So I wouldn't say that was something that you would necessarily find interesting from that perspective. The game itself is fun to play. I've always had fun playing it. I've always seen new people have fun playing it. And it's a game that I have in my collection. I've had it in my collection for a long, long time, and I cannot ever imagine getting rid of it. So, Stone Age for me is a great game. Objectively, I would say it's a simple, low weight game that is a good introduction to board gaming. It's a good introduction to worker placement games, and a good example of what modern board gaming started out being 10, 15 years ago. I hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you for listening. If you want to see more of our content, then subscribe to the channel. Please feel free to like and comment on this video. If you want to, you can head over to our Ko-fi page, link in the description, where you can tip us or support us on a monthly basis. We'll be bringing stuff out weekly at the very least. So until next time, long days, pleasant nights.